Good evening, folks. It's me. I'm just doing a little bit of a short impromptu live, and it's sort of on a theme that I've talked about previously, but I'm going to say it again because I think I'm just going to keep saying it till it sinks in. And so this is my own lived experience. This is not. I'm Please don't take this that I'm telling anybody what to do or that you should do like I'm doing. But I think I called it like put your suitcase in the train station locker for a bit. Because I've been having some back and forth. Um, I'm continuing to be on my journey, right? And we've gone pretty far out with synchronicity and consciousness and uh, scrying devices and children as part of this network supercomputer. And have a sort of a small group of colleagues, and we mostly sort of collaborate digitally, but like behind the scenes, not publicly. And so recently, I've been digging into some work that my friend Sean was exploring around this guy John Rogers. And John Rogers was a keynote presenter at the Bretton Woods 75 gathering, and an interesting character because he had a background essentially bridging entertainment and defense consulting for creativity, mixed table creativity. And I'm going to have a whole big thing planned with, I've been making, shocker, a bunch of maps and things like that. But this guy Rogers is pretty interesting, and he's kind of very low key, but he's networked. He's one of those people that on paper maybe doesn't look super duper powerful, but like networked. So he has this whole podcast with Michaela Uliaru, the Romanian complexity theorist who's working in emergence in Holland with Ben Goertzel and Daniel Schmachtenberger and all these people. And of course, they're using indigenous wisdom, and primordial knowledge as cover for all of their stuff, which is, totally baked into the UN. And shocker, Charles Eisenstein is involved in all of it too. So I'm trying to sort of engage in some of this, again, working behind the scenes. And I've been doing some exchanges with staffers, and literally I have like 50 documents that I'm trying to put together and get in the map so other people can look at them if they want to, and get the PDFs up and get these new concepts under my belt. Because a lot of this stuff, we actually essentially, I'm going to put most of this on her. She was really her idea, but I have sort of the back end, like, I can see where it fits into the iPads in the kindergarten. But this idea of using, and actually Verity Hound had shared with me a link in the last live around this thing called prophet or prophetic AI, which they had this device, which is an EEG device called Halo, and they were essentially going to work at capturing lucid dreaming. And so it occurred to me that Melanie Swan's Cloud Mind, sort of keeping threads and transcripts of everyone's contributions, and these wearables and the meditation and the brain tone EEGs where you make art with your brain, that ultimately Steffers had found a lot of material about epiphanies, this idea of epiphany. And it's quite interesting because John Rogers' mother, I think Margaret Rogers, was she was an independent researcher in literary studies, and her expertise was Joyce and Finnegan's Wake. And she was able to hear music in the literary writing of James Joyce. And because she had a mind that worked that way, synesthesia. So she was actually, and Joyce was really central to the idea of epiphany, like bringing back the idea of epiphany into modern parlance. And so we sort of theorized, and I think Steffer sort of had the lead on this, but I was like backing into it with the blockchain stuff, that ultimately we're going back and forth on some of these threads, that epiphany, I was like, wait a minute. My one contribution. I'm pretty sure that the wearable technology in Werner Vinge's Rainbow's End was called Epiphany. And then we went back, and sure enough, that was right. And there's Epiphany, VR glasses. And so I'm like, wow, okay. So they're going to try to create these mixed table scenarios, which is what John Rogers is good at, and what he was working with the Defense Department and Hollywood creatives at. And I'm really convinced that even though he's talking about Hollywood entertainment creatives, ultimately it's going to be scaled at mass, and the creatives are actually going to be the kids, little kids. Again, wisdom of the crowd, but but many, millions upon millions of little kids, especially little kids in the global south who are hooked into the World Bank impact bonds. And that they're going to try to capture epiphanies. They're going to try to capture things that maybe are awarenesses of concepts and ideas and quote unquote solutions or intellectual property, are things that we might not even have a language for. Either body language or written language or spoken language, we may not even be able to communicate, because I think that synesthesia is part of this as well. So there's lots of things that we're exploring and turning over, and new ideas, right? Autopoiesis, which Jefferson has talked about and Seb Solomon has talked about, and this idea of emergence and then fragility and precariousness in relation to autopoiesis. And we had talked about Umwelt, so spending a little bit more time on Umwelt and proprioception and sensing mechanisms and autoethnography. Like, there's a lot of concepts that we're working on getting familiar with, because it's part of the puzzle. And I'll link to, actually, there's a really fascinating article about John Rogers' mother and Ulysses in the Chicago Tribune, because evidently as a young woman, before her husband relocated to Milwaukee, they were living in Chicago, and she had a job as an assistant researcher on a Hittite dictionary with people. So we're talking about like Sumerian Namshubs, Namshub of Inky type stuff. It's fascinating. It's totally fascinating. And essentially she was about the puzzle. She was about trying to figure out the puzzle. And I think John Rogers is about figuring out the puzzle. And he's figuring out the puzzle by essentially pairing defense interests and all of that money flow with entertainment. But I think ultimately it's going to go into the stuff I've been discussing about, precognition or remote viewing or things beyond the material veil of the field, and then how to get in there. And so, like, I just had a few exchanges recently, and I've been a little bit in the comments. And again, I'm not saying you have to do this. I'm just saying it's something to consider. First, I'm going to just reemphasize that the next time you're ready to make a comment that has like lots of exclamation points, or is very sarcastic, or calls somebody garbage, or makes aspersions, is that the energy that we're putting out into this thing like bounces back onto us. And if the system and the feed is triggering you to respond in this immediate visceral way that is highly emotional, like, one, it's not going to be good for your body or your adrenal glands. And two, once you put that energy out there, it's a hard stop, and you don't actually have to know anything about it other than bad. And then that's a dead stop, in my opinion. And so, I've been putting up a bunch of shorts today that are linked to these things. And there's reasons that I'm putting there, but the answer isn't always, why is this bad? Jason and I are going to do a longer discussion about Derek Brose's talk at MIT. And the goal isn't to make Derek a bad guy. It's to talk about actually the topics of importance and what that talk says about what was said and what wasn't said, and things that are of interest to us that are substantive. It's not just about a personality thing. It's not just about putting somebody in a box. It's having a conversation. And so I would just say, if like someone said, like under Derek's thing, tell me what he's saying and why is it wrong? And I would say, that's a really wrong question to ask, right? Well, one, I'm putting up material, and you should decide what you think about it, right? And it might take some thinking on your part. It might take some investigating on your part. This is what I'm putting out, is more like a puzzle opportunity, a common puzzle opportunity, than something that I'm just trying to like push your button. Here's a scary thing, push your button. Here's another scary thing, push your button. Here's something that'll make you angry, push your button. Here's a kitten, you like that, push your button. Like, I'm not here to push buttons. I'm here to sort of lay out puzzle pieces and see who might want to play with in the space with the puzzle pieces. So I would say that the next time you're tempted to say what's going on and why is it wrong, one, just because like that's reductive. That's a reductive thing. So and that's why I'm saying put that, I would suggest, I'm not telling you have to do it, but if you're the kind of person that wants to explore and go farther afield and learn new ideas and figure things out, carrying around like a suitcase full of rocks to throw at things that are bad is going to weigh you down and you're not going to get that far. You're just not. Now, there may be a lot of people for whom they really like throwing rocks, and there's other people there throwing rocks and they like to hang out with those people throwing rocks. And so like they don't really want to put the suitcase away. They'd rather just hang out in the town square and throw rocks because that's what they like. And that's okay. Like the world takes, I've come to the point that the world takes a lot of different kinds of people. So if your thing is that you would like to hang out with others and throw rocks in the park, then you totally can do that and fill up your suitcase with rocks and do that all day long. But if you want to go farther, if you want to start poking into these other ideas, carrying around the rocks to throw at things that are bad isn't going to help. And I'm saying this as someone who carried around a lot of rocks and threw a lot of rocks. In fact, like in my experience with my family, I think my crusading personality of labeling things as bad and then going against them ultimately was something I had to learn about myself. And that it doesn't mean these things I'm co-signing if I'm not throwing rocks that I think those things that are happening are good. And that's not it either. I'm not here to say that like if I'm not throwing rocks at the thing that I'm agreeing that it's okay. But some of us need to go farther afield, and that's harder to do if what you're doing is staying emotionally triggered in one place. So so I wanted to say that. And then again, I had another exchange with someone who was sort of adjacent to, and again, we're all 6 degrees of separation. So nobody's like out here. Nobody has a clean slate. Nobody's perfect, right? To some ideas, some individuals that like could potentially be problematic down the road. Like they're overlapping with this emerging global brain, right? And there was another person who was adjacent to that person. And I said, oh, do you know about this person? Like, is this somebody who's in your network? Because I was surprised. It was Jordan Hall in North Carolina. I was like, oh, so Jordan Hall's North Carolina. That's interesting. Well, let me just ask about that. And the response was immediately as if I was trying to blame or place blame and point a finger and throw a rock. And so the immediate thing was to duck and throw a rock back, kind of like maybe a smaller rock. But like, I told you, we're not bad people. And I'm like, I'm not even saying that's bad. I trying to figure out Jordan Hall's meta psychotechnology and Vervaeke and where it's going with Uluru and the indigenous elders. Like my thought process, because I've got a light backpack and I left my rocks in the train station, like I'm out over the hill and I'm still looking for things. And again, not to throw the rocks, but to make sense of what it is. Because I think that some of us are meant to try to do that job. Not everybody has to do that job, but some of us are supposed to do that job. So I'm over the hill looking and I'm saying, hey, do you have information on this? Because now you're sort of my intel in this geography. And the answer was sort of a hard stop. I'm not bad. Don't put that label on me. And ultimately, the reality is this was someone I had a lovely conversation with, but that door is closed at this point because they did not seem to have the capacity to put down the rocks and to not take things personally. And simply a better response would have been, oh, who's that? What are they up to? Why are you interested in them? How does this connect to these other things that we had a conversation about? I'm pretty sure this person doesn't know anything about meta psychotechnology or what the wisdom of crowds of, children in alternative education environments might be. We didn't extend the conversation into that because it didn't get there because some of us were dragging rocks. And again, I say that as someone who dragged a lot of rocks. I've done it myself. So I'm not here to lecture. I'm here just to reflect on my own personal experience and my own growth trajectory. So yeah, that's mostly what I wanted to say about like emotional triggering, the good, bad rock throwing. And then the other thing I will say beyond the rocks is simply sometimes you actually have to set down how you understood things. And a lot of it does kind of overlap with the good, bad throwing rock thing, but not exclusively. Because what I see when I put up clips for the most part is like people applying and this is what John Rogers, I guess this is why I wanted to say. So his keynote at Bretton Woods 75 essentially was saying we're all a prisoner of our own perspective. And in that, he was actually pretty accurate, right? And it doesn't mean that you're a bad person, that you're a prisoner of your own perspective. We are all an aggregate of our own personal experiences. Where we were born, how we grew up, what our professional lives are like, what our family lives are like, what our community relationships are like. We can't all do all the things. So you only can speak to, well, these days we're washed by the feed, right? So it's not like we're only speaking to our direct experiences, where we've got our direct experiences with a huge energetic overlay of a bunch of glommed on stuff, a lot of which is garbage and then some of which is useful. But we are limited by our perspective. And so it does actually make sense to be with people that have different perspectives. If we left the rocks at the train station and we can talk about it, I thought that was really helpful. And so think about how we've been throughout the lockdowns. We've been conditioned to have ways of looking at things, how we thought about things. And some of that involves clicks and teaming and influencers and ideas. And we hold on to that. And sometimes we try to apply old ideas to new information, and it's not the best fit, but people like try to stick it on there anyway. And what I've been inviting, like one of the key things I keep trying to encourage people to consider is these concepts of biophysics, like signal communication within cells and organisms, all the stuff with Levin. Social physics, which is applying that at a bigger scale to society, and then econophysics, which are these cyclical progressions of life on Earth. So biophysics, social physics, and econophysics, because I think they're all interrelated and they're all at scale. So I did put up another clip. I've had it before from Learning is Earning, because I want to include this one about this girl and this protein folding puzzle project. And it's fascinating because I'm looking back and now I see like I'd seen the icosahedron edublock things before, but it's like everyone is an hour and it's timing. And I'm like, oh, it's a resonant quasi crystal. This goes with the Israeli guy with the quasi crystals and the Sphinx. And like, I can see it. I'd seen it before, but I didn't have enough scaffolding to see it for what it was. And so ultimately, at one level, it's about a young girl and child labor. This is how I talked about it when I first saw the video in like 2016. Oh my gosh, this is about global labor. This is about child labor. This is about blockchain credentialing and badges. And ultimately what the girl was doing was solving these protein folding puzzles, because it's a mass puzzle thing. And it is still all of those things. But ultimately, these nested campaigns that John Rogers is talking about, which is going to be project-based learning, these nested campaigns are part of this protocol singularity layer in the superorganism. So now when I see her individually, I'm thinking, yes, the global labor, and I'm not co-signing that that's okay, but I'm looking at her now more about the biophysics, right? In this global superorganism, what does the world look like if all of a sudden we have an AI system that for project-based learning is, see, this is not helpful. So here's someone, why am I not, warning people about the 40 agenda? I did that. I did that in March of 2020. I did that already. There's a whole lot of other people doing that. You can do that. If that's what you want, go to somebody else's station, because they're running that hamster wheel a ton. I mean, like I said, I just put up the Les Yale, the 12 fronting indigenous wisdom from the UN, and that's Michaela Uluru and Charles Eisenstein. So yeah, if you can't use your brain at this point and look at that Les Yale UN, the 12 indigenous elders film and realize what that's about, do I need to like walk you through it and say all the triggering things again in the mind template that you already have? That's what you're looking for. Go somewhere else and just block that person. That's ridiculous. Come on, people, grow up. It's not middle school. So either you want to get out of the train station, out of the city park where everyone's throwing rocks, and go for a walk and walk away from some of these ways of thinking that are limited. Yeah, it doesn't mean you have to say it's okay. It doesn't mean that you have to agree with it. But if you know it, why are you just going to stay there? Why would you not continue to learn other things? Right? We're alive for a reason. Like some of us, I mean, and maybe, like I said, this one individual seemed to not really want to know because they were in a certain story. And yeah, if you want to stay in that story, I'm not here to drag you out of any story. But if you come over into my space, if you email me, if you come into my comments, there's a chance I might engage with you and I might, you know, challenge you a little bit on how we're acting. So to raise the bar, as Jason would say, we're trying to raise the bar a little bit. And so if you want a playground with the rock throwers, there's a bazillion of those. And that's not here. That's not what I'm doing here. So the old ways of thinking may be limited. And maybe you're okay with those limits. And I'm not here to drag you out and say you have to listen to my story and go walk around and play with my puzzle pieces. Absolutely not. But if you want to, if you're interested in the material we're exploring, and again, I'm on behalf of like a small group of collaborators, including Steffers, who isn't at this point putting out a lot of public material, but we have our own little sort of group research project, and it's kind of fascinating, actually. I mean, sometimes it involves Hittite dictionaries and NamShubs and biophotonic entanglement, right? And autopoiesis and epiphanies, capturing epiphanies and intellectual properties on blockchain cloud mines. And that there's just going to be a lot more than, let me just tell you another thing, like, about Agenda 2030. And for some people, I'm sure that conversation, that technocracy, that communitarian, that thing, it's like a cozy blanket. They love snuggling in that blanket and they love to stay there. And I mean, I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to say that you're not entitled to be cozy in that cozy blanket. But if you're over here on my channel, I'm just saying, so be thoughtful about the emotional triggers, about either throwing rocks or perceiving that rocks are thrown at you when what you're trying to do is like engage in an exploration of material. And be willing, like John Rogers says, to maybe set down some of your ways of thinking to get a new perspective, because in that space, you can then go back to the things you knew and see them in a new way, see them in a clearer way. That's what has happened for me. So I'm making 2 big maps that I'll talk about in a bit. One is with John Rogers and all the aspects of like social wearables, LARPing, PBL, problem solving, social emotional learning, psychodrama, emergent behavior, thought forms, EEG wearables, all of this stuff. It's fascinating. But I had another conversation with someone who is involved in Maine, which is a test bed of a lot of the early competency-based education stuff. And in that conversation, I went back and I revisited stuff that I initially, when I first started my blog in 2016, that's what I was talking about. And I got to go back and look at all the stuff that I'd entered in Little Sis, at this point, like 7, 8 years ago, with a much clearer lens, because I could understand that, wow, it seems like children's imaginative access to the beyond is being integrated into sensor networks through their education devices to, in my opinion, aggregate this wisdom of crowds for some sort of computation. And it may actually deeply involve emotional states of children together. And so I didn't let go of all of that. I just did a journey. My journey went through impact finance and poverty and addiction and the health lockdowns. And, I'm still wandering, but I can still go back. It's allowed. But if I had to carry all of that with me all the time and always be measuring good, bad, let me see, where is this thing? I don't think I would be able to find the things that I found. And so again, I'm saying this with like care in my heart because I've been there. I really have. I remember my kids saying, you have to change everything about yourself because you say, Bill Gates is a bad guy. And it's not like I say he's a good guy, but that view was limiting. If I had just held on to that and every day I did whack-a-mole with something, a Bill Gates thing, and I said, bad, bad, bad. Oh, here's another thing, bad. And the World Economic Forum is throwing things out, bad, bad. And you're just playing whack-a-mole, bad reaction, bad reaction. I wouldn't know the things I know now. And I wouldn't have friendships with fellow independent researchers who are also fascinated with this puzzle. Because for us to figure out the labyrinth, and for me, the person is that elder grandmother who's in the labyrinth and holding the labyrinth. For me to get to that point, I need to keep looking. And the whack-a-mole is just, it takes too long. It takes too many resources. So anyway, if you are one of the people I have engaged with, I'm trying to put this out there with a kind heart. But it's hard. It's hard for me because for the most part, I've walked so far off the map that there's not a commonality of reference points between me and most people who walk into the space. And repeatedly over the past few months, I've opened myself up to having engagements with people in the hopes that there will be bridges built. And it hasn't happened. For the most part, there's been a couple of exceptions, but for the most part, it hasn't, because people are still hung up in these spaces. So yeah, we'll just have to see how it goes. I'm sure the park is full of a lot of suitcases full of rocks. But I think there's stuff out there if we want to go look for it, but we should put the rocks down first. And again, doesn't mean we're co-signing or saying it's okay. But if, like I said, I was talking with someone recently, and I'm still very pro nature, but it was like nature will win. And I'm like, I don't know if we're all connected in the system. Like, would the divine presence of the universe set up a win-lose game? Or would the game be something else? And if we're all connected, like some of us get certain parts and some of us get other parts. And ultimately, the drama of life, there is a dramatic arc to it. If everything was always just fine, there wouldn't be anything, right? Like there wouldn't be, so yeah, like maybe sometimes you're playing the person who's generally perceived of as the protagonist and the antagonist, and we take turns, some of these people, I'm just watching Michaela Uluru and John Rogers and thinking, these people are total, like they're really characters. If you look at them like they're characters, it's a little more entertaining. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents for this Saturday evening. Hopefully it's worthwhile, and yeah, let's just try. Let's just try. And if you're gonna like jump on and be super reactive in my comments, I'm gonna probably go like, let's raise the bar. Like, do you have an observation? And there was one person, I have to say tonight, really good. I initially had a comment, and so they said, okay, so I looked this up and this is what I saw. And that's awesome. I think that's the way to do it. I looked and this is what I found. And I said, that's good. Okay. So the next thing to do is look up the woman who's speaking, because I think that's going to be where you're going to find the stuff that's interesting. Right. And then I put in a link to the map of Michaela Uluru. So that's where we have to go. And I'm willing to engage in that way. Like if we can do like, okay, so this is what I'm thinking. And I'm like, okay, I'm seeing it like this. Like, and we can have some back and forth, because again, I'm not always saying that I've got the right analysis. I just have my perspective and how I'm thinking about it. And you guys can't get in my head, and you can't see out of my eyeballs. So, so that was good. So let's try some more of that. Because there's some interesting clips going up, and a lot of this stuff, like I said, we have this small collaborative, and my friend Sean, who did the recent guest post, was looking into this guy, John Rogers. And it's fascinating because the XAPI technology that's behind all of the immersive reality tracking in your learner record, that's going to really be your life locker thing. There's a video I have where there's like 3 little flip kind of clocks, and it's noun verb object is what XAPI did. Like I did this. And like there's a whole series in the middle of this 1.5 minute clip that's like all the things that John Rogers did. But I don't think he ended up actually being a colonel or anything like that. He was just like an assistant secretary of the Defense Department. But I think it definitely was a hat tip to John Rogers. So there's a lot more material coming out. And Steffers is like, she's got a lot going on. So I have like 40 more papers to scan through and add to the map before I get a chance to talk about it. But yeah, it's an interesting puzzle. It's an interesting puzzle. So let's, you know, if you're over here on my channel, let's think of it like that. So anyway, good night, everybody. Have a good weekend.